it's growing steadily. The market is, and when I'm saying that, it from very different angles. One, because a secondary transaction is more appropriate for bigger companies, because, like I said, you're doing it on unlimited information, and you're getting shares that are inferior in terms of rights, and it's a better. It's a financial transaction by its nature. It's not a VC transaction. Um, and therefore it's better fit for bigger and larger companies. And luckily, during the last decade, when we started out, there were 37 unicorns in the worldwide. Okay, which are these are the prospects that are fitting for a secondary transaction.
Chaim Shiff, welcome to the Matthias Experiment and 20-Minute Leaders. I'm really excited to have you here. As I always do with these episodes, I treat them as experiments, and I treat the experiment as a hypothesis, validation, and then some evidence. I'm really excited to dive into another hypothesis today. Today, we're all about secondary markets. We're talking about a world in which we're all living in, especially in Startup Nation, and of course the whole tech ecosystem, and also a subject I know very little about. So I'm really excited to understand it better from you. Chaim, you're the CEO of The Elephant. You're an extremely significant player in this ecosystem. So obviously an extremely relevant conversation to have with you as an expert. And I'm just excited for the next conversation. So Chaim, again, welcome.
Thank you, Michael. It's a pleasure being here, and thanks for having me. I think we're going to have a short intro on what secondary means for those of us who are not familiar with it. I think that people in the tech ecosystem are more familiar with what we call primary, where a company raises money from investors, go through the diligence process, and sign the documentation, and they receive money into the company, and they issue new shares. Usually, we're talking about different classes of shares as the company moves forward. So they start with seed and pre-seed, actually, and then they go through rounds A, B, C, D, and issue a new class of shares every round. When we're talking, and the company is the one that benefits from the funding. Okay, they raise money for the company to allow it to grow and expand and move forward. But what has happened, along the past, I guess, 15 years is that private companies have been accruing enormous value and keep on staying private. They're not going public. If the statistics were 3 to 5 years for companies to go public or disappear, unfortunately, but you had a term that you could expect the company to understand if you have an exit or not. Now companies are staying private for 10, 12, 15 years, and they're still very successful, and they're creating enormous value. We just saw that SpaceX did a secondary tender, basically, at a valuation of $200 billion, and they're still private. Okay, so this is a phenomenon that has come about the past 15 years, and you're seeing a lot more private companies, huge private companies that are taking their time with going public. What that means is that you have shareholders, employees, founders, early investors who invested in a company or received options in the company, and they're sitting on enormous value of shares, but it's still private. So, I'll give you just a great example of a deal we just did for an ex-employee of a startup that is valued now at $13 billion, and his salary was under $100,000 a year, and his shares were worth $15 million. So, and he's moved on from this company, and now he's in a startup of his own, and he needs a couple $1 million to support it. And he says, "Listen, I'm sitting on this piece of paper; it's worth a lot of money, and how do I actually get liquidity? How do I actually monetize this piece of paper?" And so that's an example of, and this is obviously a worldwide phenomenon where you're seeing more and more private companies worth a lot more money and staying private for longer. So there's a need for liquidity. And that need for liquidity is just growing as these companies are creating more value. So that's from the sell side. From the other side, you have investors who want to come into these companies, but when the companies are doing what we said, a primary round, as we explained, when they are raising funds, these are already big companies. They only talk to the big boys, right? They'll talk to Andreessen Horowitz, and they'll talk to BlackRock, and they'll talk to the people that they don't just come and write a $50 million check. They're also familiar names, and they can take them further and whatever. So even if you come with a $10 million check, they're not going to take you. So if I want to invest now in Anthropic, if I want to invest now in you know the big names, you don't have access in the primary. So now we have an option through connecting these sellers and these buyers, and this is a secondary transaction. So a secondary transaction is where you're buying shares from an existing shareholder. He gets liquidity, and he exercises some of his holdings, and you step into his shoes as an investor in the company. So that is, the basic difference between secondaries and primaries. And this is where we've realized, and we've been doing this for a long time, this need is only going to grow. Um, like we said, companies are staying private for longer. More and more value is locked and needs to be unlocked and need to be freed up. And this is the solutions that we come to bring.
I have a question, Chaim. So, I mean, what you're saying effectively, first of all, it makes a lot of sense. You're basically saying something very, you mentioned the market trend that says until recently or in previously, the ability for us to be primary shareholders of companies was made through the fact that companies had a public offering within 3 to 5 years. And so the span in which you were not able to do that was pretty small. And so we were able to do that. But now, given that companies are extending their lifespan of them being in a private situation, extending now to 10 plus years, and we see that, and you mentioned, for example, SpaceX, and we have many examples now, then there's now a new need for two types of stakeholders. One is you have the stakeholders that want to sell, right? There were perhaps ex-employees or founders, or they have some shares within the organization and they want to sell. And then you have the other stakeholders who want to buy. And they are the ones who don't have access necessarily to the deal as primary shareholders, but they want to have access as investors so that they can continue and expand on the value that they're generating. And so this is what you classify as the secondary market. Now, hopefully, I got that roughly correct. But what is really the challenge here? So what are the market dynamics that make this not a trivial, as in, hey, Chaim, I saw you invested in this company. Can I just buy a few shares from you because I like it?
Right. Well, first of all, what we explained was the most basic part of the secondary market. There's a lot more variations to it, but we'll try to keep it simple. And yes, you've touched on some challenges that we face in transacting in the secondaries market, and it starts with the first of all, it's a private company. It's not a publicly traded company that you can just go online, enter your brokerage account, and buy shares of a public company and sell shares, etc. These are private companies, and it has to be approved by the company. You have to go through the process of the company, which includes right of first refusal, right of first offer, whatever is in their governing documents, articles of association. You have to go through KYC and transfer of funds, and if we're talking about employees, you have to bring in the ESOP trustee, and it's a long process. It takes time, but the first thing is, does the company allow a secondary transaction? And the company on one hand may want to give liquidity, and it serves their purposes in one way, but at the same time, it also gets in the way of maybe other things that the company has in mind. Maybe they don't want the employees to have too much liquidity, and then they become rich and they leave the company the next day. So that's something they have to take. Maybe they're doing a primary round, and if a secondary transaction is usually done at a discount because these are usually common shares or early preferred shares, and whereas the valuation of the company was set for the last primary round of whatever class of preferred shares, but it's later on. So usually it involves a discount to mitigate on that. Maybe the company doesn't want, while they're trying to raise, to see their shares being traded at a 30% discount, 40% discount, whatever it is. Um, so I'm saying that there are some interests that are not necessarily aligned, and sometimes it also depends on where the company is at that point in time. If they're doing a primary round, maybe they'll halt it. Maybe now they want to give more liquidity, so they'll be more cooperative. So the idea is that at the end of the day, you're dependent on the company's cooperation, not just in the technical side of things of processing a transaction, okay, and going through the right of first refusal and the registration and whatever. You also need, almost in every company, you need board approval for a secondary transaction, and that's already where you get into sometimes conflictive interests of the companies. Another another I guess gap that you need to bridge in order to get a deal done is information gap. Okay, when you're doing a primary transaction and you're working with a company, you have all the data in front of you. All right, you have your lawyers doing due diligence, you have your accountants doing due diligence, you have your patent lawyers doing due diligence, and you know the company pretty much inside out and where they're at. Where there is a secondary transaction and the company is not the one receiving the funds, okay, or it's not a company led secondary tender, okay, the interest of the company to reveal and basically to hand over their data um, is limited, and therefore they sometimes will not allow the transaction at all. Sometimes they will allow it, but they will not provide any data. Sometimes they will provide a certain level of data subject to NDA and whatever. So that is also a gap that you need to bridge between. Sometimes even the seller doesn't have the data, and sometimes even if he has the data, he can't share it because he's under confidentiality, right? But you, as an investor, it's great that you read in the newspaper a great article about the company. But if you want to know exactly what's going on there, or at least to an extent that you feel comfortable with doing a transaction based on certain financial parameters, you need that data. So that is also a challenge that sometimes can be difficult for the parties to get to common grounds.
So Chaim, I'm really curious. You've spent the last more than 8 years with the elephant, and you're obviously very interested in the space. So what gets you really excited about this ecosystem and what you get to do? So what is it about this space and the secondary market that makes you very curious and interested here?
First of all, it's growing steadily. The market is, and when I'm saying that, it from very different angles. One, because a secondary transaction is more appropriate for bigger companies, because, like I said, you're doing it on unlimited information, and you're getting shares that are inferior in terms of rights, and it's a financial transaction by its nature. It's not a VC transaction. Um, and therefore it's better fit for bigger and larger companies. And luckily, during the last decade, when we started out, there were 37 unicorns in the worldwide. Okay, which are these are the prospects that are fitting for a secondary transaction. Now we're talking about over 1,200, 1,300, whatever. It depends how you want to count it worldwide. So now, if you want to do if, for example, you want to do a secondary transaction in a cybersecurity company, it's not, oh, I got one, let's try and get what you got a list of names that you can pick from and try to choose the one that you believe in, and whatever the value that's been uh, created and locked has grown exponentially over the past decade. And that's why this secondary market is growing to over $100 billion a year in terms of transaction volume, is because the need is growing. And what's also exciting to see is tools that are growing in parallel to to the market. If it's data platforms that you can now find out information on the company without the company telling you, right? Because you have like um, you know platforms like PitchBook and Crunchbase and whatever, and you can find out whatever, and it helps to complete the picture. Um, Whether it's Nasdaq already also building the secondary market platform that we work with, and that brings legitimacy into the process. And again, and you're seeing that the public market is shrinking and the private market is growing, so you understand where is the direction of the value, where it stands, the breakdown between public and private. And the more sophisticated that the secondary market is going to become, and like we said, through data platforms and trading platforms and secondary platforms like ourselves, the better tools you're going to have and the better process that you're going to be able to create to make it smoother. It's only going to make complete the picture and the shift, I think, from public markets to the private. It's not going to replace it. Okay, let's we're not fooling ourselves, but there's plenty of room from between. If I look at where you see where what is growing and what is actually declining, and you're seeing the focus moving to private markets, that really gets me excited, because I understand that what we saw about a decade ago is happening and maturing in front of our eyes, and we're really looking forward to see where the future is holding on that.
Love it, Chaim. This is very cool, and it sounds. I mean, it just sounds like we're everything is evolving, and everything is growing, and we're identifying the right mechanisms to create win-win situations here. And I love going back to how you started to explaining how you have the different parties who have different who are looking to play the same game, and they have different reasons, but ultimately it's all about creating the right platform that enables them to have that win-win synergy, and which I think is just very exciting in general. I mean, it's and especially 1,200 1,300 unicorns in comparison to dozens or hundreds before, and so it's very, very exciting. And I really want to thank you for coming here and sharing this time with me, and your insights, and continuing to do great work with the elephant. And thank you very much, Chaim.
Thank you, Micha. Thanks for having me. Have a great
I
day.
really appreciate it.